can begin thinking on starting. The session will be recorded for everyone. So if you want to rewatch again later, it would be possible. I will provide you all a link for a YouTube playlist here on the chat. So there will be where you can find this recorded session. And also, I will give all the participants another link to Google Forms where you can put your name and your email and just confirm your attendance, because we are going to use this to create your certificate at the end of the workshop. Okay, so RP, we are ready when you are.
Okay. Well, you can click to the opening slide then.
Perfect.
And I'll just say click when I want to change something. Okay. Well, welcome everybody. I'm really happy to be getting together with you, even though we're so far apart. I'm in Canada, and my city is actually coming out of the harsh restrictions. We're very lucky. We're very flat on the COVID curve, and we're doing very well. So I wish you the same good luck. I feel a lot of empathy for everybody, because I know that this is such a struggle, and here you are entering a new phase in your school, and you're trying to deal with that while you're also trying to deal with virtual classes and supporting your staff and making sure families know that Maple Bear is there for them. So I admire you and I empathize with you, and I'm going to try to help you today with whatever it is that I can do to make the transition to elementary a little bit easier. I want to say a little bit about myself so that you know that I know what I'm talking about. I have over 40 years of experience in working in schools, and the last 5-6 years have been with Maple Bear, and I've been to over 30 Maple Bear schools as a trainer and a quality assurance reviewer. And so I feel like I have a very good feel for the wonders of Maple Bear, and I've seen so many schools that do so many things well, and I've also seen some pitfalls that people have fallen into, and I hope that I can help you avoid some of the problems and to do the things that work really, really well in Maple Bear schools. I do want to apologize a little bit, or a lot, because the way I'm doing this webinar is not what I'm going to be preaching to you about how Maple Bear teaching should be done. I'm going to be talking and talking and talking, and that is the exact opposite of the way we want our Maple Bear teachers to operate in the classroom. I apologize for it, but I feel like there's not a lot of ways to impart this information in a virtual way. Normally, if I were doing this, we would have 2 days together, and I would have you working together, and I would have you working in centers and rotating through different activities to try to model what it is I'm going to be talking about when it comes to Maple Bear elementary best practices. So I'm very sorry, so sorry that it's going to be talk. But here we go. Click, Bia. Keep going to the next slide. Yes, we're going to expand on the 5 domains that are contained in the Maple Bear Quality Assurance Review. And we're going to start right now. Next. As I'm talking, I think it's a good idea if you have an idea or you have a question that you jot them down or type them into your chat area if you have a question. I do want to address them at the end. I'm not going to stop during the presentation because I feel I may answer some of your questions before you finish today. So we're going to carry on bravely. but no question is a dumb question. So if you want to put it into the chat for later, that's great. All right, next. All right, I know that you know the Maple Bear vision, but I think it's worth reminding yourself of it. It's our vision is to provide a high quality preschool, elementary, and high school education based on the Canadian philosophy and best practices that meet the expectations of global parents and is in conformity with local regulations. So I think it's important for you to recognize that we are based on Canadian best practices, and that seems obvious, but a lot of times when you get into discussions with parents, they seem to forget that they bought Maple Bear Canadian education. So we have to keep reminding them this is what we do because this is Maple Bear. Next slide, please. And our mission is to deliver a student-focused learning system. And I know that because you have early years in your schools already, you understand what I'm talking about here, but I'm really going to emphasize it as we carry on. Student-focused as opposed to teacher-focused, safe, secure, stimulating environment. And that's mainly what I'm going to be talking about today. Next slide, please. So we want to develop the whole child, not just their brain. We want to talk about physical, intellectual, emotional, and social learning, because all of those things are connected to cognitive learning. If you don't have the whole package, you are not going to be educating in the Maple Bear way. So we want to keep our teachers informed of this. Next slide, please. So domain 1 in the quality assurance review, and it should be domain number 1 because it's the most important thing, the quality of teaching and learning. And you can't have quality learning unless you have quality teaching. So priority number 1 always is student learning. Our mission is to create the conditions for learning for all children. And that's a heavy responsibility for you. You're the school leaders. Oh, don't cry about it. It's okay. I hear a baby crying. Only students who feel valued, safe, appropriately challenged, and happy can learn effectively. And I think one of the things that we really emphasize in Maple Bear, and it's no different from what we emphasize in early years, is that the relationship between the adults in the building and the children in the building are central to the success of the school. If you build those strong relationships and the children feel them and know that you're there, learning is going to happen, and you're going to waste a lot less time on behavior management and other things that I'm going to talk about later. So it's really important that you maintain that beautiful affection and strong relationship within guidelines that you have in your early years when you move to elementary. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about the elementary learner. You need to know that when students go from kindergarten to year 1, they don't suddenly change into some, little robot who has information poured in their ear and they write everything down that you say to them. It's not like that. It's a very gradual transition to elementary, and some of the children in year 1 are going to be behaving very similar to what kindergarten students behaved as, and particularly because they've been away from school now. They've been at home, and let's face it, there's a variety of experiences that they've had. Some of them will have attended their virtual classes regularly or have parents who are teachers or keeners about doing homeschooling, and other children will have had hardly anything. So we need to remember that our year one students don't, suddenly become grown-ups. They're not big kids. They're still little kids. So Bia, could you keep clicking there? I don't know why the thing, just keep going to the end of that list. Yeah. So our elementary learners tend to be competitive, though not always good sports. And if you watch them at recess, you'll see the competitiveness. And I think that's actually something that teachers can use to their benefit. One of the things that work really well with elementary kids is to make little competitions. And I'm not talking about for a reward like a sticker, but I am talking about which table can get this job done, which table is ready to go for snack. They like to have that little edge of competition. Sometimes they're bossy, and all children want autonomy. But as they get older, they want more autonomy, and they become kind of critical and bossy sometimes. They're talkative and noisy. And again, your teachers may think that this is something that is a bad thing. But in Maple Bear, we like noise, but we like good noise. So we want our teachers and our coordinators to help children understand the difference between crazy noise and useful noise. We want them to talk, but we want them to be focused on learning. So they're easily upset when they're criticized or discouraged. So if you have a teacher who tends to be kind of negative and calling a child's name over and over again, that child is not going to respond well. Elementary children feel it. I mean, any child feels it, but the older they get, the more personally they take it when somebody is negative with them. We want encouragement, surprises, and treats. And again, when I say treats, I don't mean, a sticker or some other kind of tangible reward. We want a treat like an extra few minutes to chat. They like to be appreciated, and who doesn't? They might test authority even more than early years children do. They might complain or tattle on each other, and you're going to notice this more than you do in early years, because the more they get to know themselves, the more they compare, and they want structure. And if they see somebody doing something that they don't think is right, they're going to try to tell you about it. And as a teacher, the teachers that you hire have to have an understanding of how to stop the tattling and turn it into a let's all work together to make this community work. Next slide, please. So elementary children, more than early years children, have a capacity for friendship. Early years children, they like each other, but when they get into elementary school, they tend to become more choosy, and they may have a best friend or a couple of best friends. And again, here's something that your expert teacher has to be aware of. We don't want cliques. We don't want, like these two girls in the picture, we don't want them to say, we only like each other. We only want to work with each other. The teacher has to be aware that even though kids have a right to prefer certain people, we have to teach them how to accept everybody and work with everybody. Elementary kids still like dressing up and putting on plays. They're not shy about doing little skits in class, but they also can be moody and touchy. They may change friendships quickly, and they may be, hurt when a friend does something they don't like. They might say, oh, that friend hates me. Nobody likes me anymore. They're kind of extreme sometimes. So your teacher, again, has to be aware of all the social emotional turmoil that the elementary children might be showing. Elementary children still rely on adults. And I'm telling you, even up into high school, the children in Maple Bear schools have a right to expect adults to help and reassure them. And that's part of our social emotional learning that we promise when people bring their kids to Maple Bear. Elementary children need the security of rules, routines, and boundaries. And I'm not talking about, a 5-page list of do's and don'ts. I'm talking about an understanding that is developed between the students and the teacher about what's appropriate and what's acceptable and how we do things. And no, we don't run around like crazy people. This is how we behave in school. We're here to learn, we're here to have fun, and we can't do that if we don't follow certain expectations. We're a community, and everybody has to be a good citizen of that community. Next slide, please. So physical development, I just want to point out the first thing here, because this is something that I've noticed in visiting early elementary year schools. Sometimes teachers assume things about kids that are not true and cause problems. For example, a student in year 1, their eyes aren't fully mature yet, and copying from the board is really difficult. And yet, quite often, we will see a teacher write a writing prompt, for example, on the whiteboard and say, write in your journal, here's the prompt, or finish this sentence. And they spend an hour going like this, doing one letter at a time. Or you'll see kids getting out of their seats to go to the board to try to copy. It's because they're not developmentally capable of it yet. So again, this is something that an elementary teacher needs to be aware of. We're asking them to start reading and writing, but if we make it hard for them by expecting them to do things that their body just can't do, we're going to have problems. So we really need to be aware of this. We know that they're growing rapidly and they like lots of physical activity and they need it. So again, your teachers need to be using movement breaks, and this helps the brain work better too, and it's fun. Kids in elementary, they quite often catch everything, and they can also get sick from worry. They start to feel, accomplishments, but also discouragement if they feel they're not doing well, and this can have a really negative effect on their health. So we don't want that. Next slide, please. Cognitive development. You're going to notice that they understand cause and effect better than early years children do. Early years children will keep making the same mistake because they can't understand why something happens. Elementary children are starting to figure that out, and they also can understand another person's point of view. But again, only if that's part of the environment in the classroom. If the teacher talks about that and helps students who are having a struggle with each other to think about the other person's point of view, rather than just saying, apologize. You hurt your friend, apologize. It's better to say, something like, do you understand why your friend is crying? Do you understand what happened here? And again, this requires a slightly different approach from early years. Elementary children understand rules, and they actually like to participate in making them. So we're going to talk a little bit about classroom agreements later. And the last 3 bullets here tell you about the kind of work that Maple Bear Elementary students thrive on. Field trips, hands-on projects, games, stories, poems, riddles, songs. They like to do a lot of work. So the teachers should benefit from that by giving them lots of work, but not just piles of worksheets. We want to give them work to keep them busy and engaged. And remember that because they think that finishing a lot of work means they did a good job, we have to help them focus on quality, not just dashing something off. Look, I finished, I'm first. again, that competitive thing comes in. I finished this, I finished. So the teacher has to help them focus on the quality of the work. And we'll talk about that more later. Another slide, Bianca, please. So Maple Bear pedagogy. Let's take a moment to pat ourselves on the back here. There's a reason that Maple Bear is so successful around the world. And one of the reasons is because the way we teach children is based on research, and it works. And the fact is that Canada ranks #1 in English-speaking countries in this PISA assessment that you've probably read about in the Maple Bear magazine. It's a test that they give around the world to 15-year-olds. And the kinds of questions they ask allow them to compare the kind of cognitive skills that the school system has allowed the children to develop. And Maple Bear has followed Canadian pedagogy for that reason. It's successful. And I'm telling you this, even though I think you probably know it, because I want you to talk to your parents about this. I want you to remind them that there's a reason why Maple Bear does what Maple Bear does. There's a reason for the way our teachers teach. There's a reason for the kinds of work we ask the students to do. There's a reason for our policies about homework and screen time and that kind of thing. So we want you to understand it and embrace it and not backslide, even though sometimes parents are going to be nattering at you. You got to stay strong and stick to Maple Bear pedagogy. It's student-centered, and your teachers have to understand a different role from what they may have experienced when they went to school. And I had to learn this too. I'm not saying that Canada had figured this out, a million years ago. No, I went to a teacher-centered school when I was a kid. And when I started teaching, I was teacher-centered. I was very happy with myself. I thought I knew so much and I could just talk. And I had to be persuaded and trained to understand that teacher talk does not equal teaching. There's a new way of teaching. Well, it's not that new, but there's a reputable way of teaching that minimizes teacher talk. And this is one of my favorite bits of advice to teachers that are struggling. Talk less. Stop talking. Let the kids do more. Hand over more responsibility to the kids, and they'll be happier, they'll learn more, and you'll be happier. So we have to recognize too that Maple Bear is aware of developmental stages, and we understand how children develop, and we're going to teach to them the way they need to be taught at each age level. Next slide, please. So I really want to emphasize Maple Bear pedagogy because I want you to help your teachers if they are inexperienced or if they, I call it backsliding, they understand in theory what the pedagogy is, but it's sometimes easier in the short term to slide back to do this, everybody's going to do this worksheet, and that's not Maple Bear. So Maple Bear, the challenge for the teacher is to teach children higher level thinking skills. We want them to be critical, creative, good problem solvers with deep understanding, not just kids who are going to sit and regurgitate what a teacher said. Because if you think back to your own schooling, if you're involved in the school now, you probably did well in school. And school in the old manner does work for some people, but it doesn't work for a lot of people. It doesn't work for a lot of kids. And we don't want to lose kids. Maple Bear is for every kid to do well. So our students have to be active, hands-on, have real learning experiences that relate to their developmental level. We want them to enjoy learning, and we want them to want to learn more, not fight, and say, oh, do we have to do this? Next slide. Maple Bear requires teachers to know where each individual student is. So we don't just teach to the middle. We don't just look at the lesson plan that Maple Bear nicely provides to our teachers and say, well, we're going to do this no matter what. We want Maple Bear teachers to look at the lesson plans and be selective. And yes, I'm saying it, they don't have to do every single thing. In fact, I don't know if it's humanly possible to do every single thing in Maple Bear lessons, early years or elementary. And I don't think it's intended to be that prescriptive. The idea is the teacher knows their children and chooses. Now, some things you have to do. You mean you want to follow the routine of the day and do the things like circle time, and you need to have some structure. But the lessons can be much more flexible than some teachers are aware of. So as school leaders, your job is to reassure your teachers and to help them when they're doing their lesson plans, to not bite off more than they can chew or try to do things that don't fit into the day or that don't fit their children. Each class is different and it's got a different profile. So the teachers need to understand that and prepare their lesson with that in mind. We want the teachers to observe their students regularly and take notes. And again, you're aware of this because your early years teachers are used to doing this. But with elementary, sometimes some strange thing happens where teachers think that in elementary school, it's time for tests. And that's the way that you discover, where kids are at. Well, by the time you do tests, it's almost counterproductive if you haven't done the previous assessments. So we have to convince teachers that tests are for later, much later. We want teachers to assess, and I'm going to talk about assessment later. We want the teacher to use a mix of individual, small group, and whole group teaching. But I really want to ask you to help your teachers minimize whole group teaching. It's the least successful strategy. I know we have to do it. There's some things that you need to tell the whole class or discuss with the whole class. But if you go on and on and on with whole class, you're going to look around the room and you're going to find kids that are, antsy. You're going to find kids with their hands up saying, Miss, can I go to the bathroom? Or Miss, I need a drink of water. Or Miss, I need to sharpen my pencil. They're telling the teacher that she's talking too much. And whole group tends to create that antsiness in kids. They don't want to sit forever and not have their activities to do. Less talk, more action. It's one of my favorite bits of advice too. So we want you as school leaders to help your teachers understand that. And if you go into classrooms and you see misbehavior and kids getting up and wandering around and going to their, cubbies or going to the bathroom all the time, you need to help the teacher by recording the frequency of that. I know that sometimes it seems harsh, but you're not going to be harsh. Sometimes the teacher's so busy teaching that it doesn't even register that there are, kids who are not paying attention and who are not actually following the directions because they aren't listening. Next slide, please. So we want backward planning. And again, your teachers don't have to do a lot of planning because the Maple Bear lesson plans are pretty thorough, but they have to know what they're doing. Why am I doing these activities? So you need to help them understand that everything stems from the outcomes or the Maple Bear big ideas, and that we are interested in concepts, not content. And I'm not saying that we don't do content. Of course we do, but it's not the be all and end all. It's the understanding first, then the content comes. We want to have kids demonstrating that they know how to demonstrate the outcome in a variety of ways, not just one way, like a test. We want students to have choices, so everybody doesn't have to do the same project. Some kids might want to make a PowerPoint. Some kids might want to do a play. Some kids might want to do a rap. We want to encourage elementary teachers to give kids some freedom and choice, because they will do much better if you give them choice. They'll probably come up with something that's way beyond what you expected if you give them that freedom within the curriculum. And the last point, learning centers are regularly used with students rotating through several activities. And again, I have seen schools where all of a sudden year one comes along and centers are gone. There's no fun, there's no play, there's no tables, there's desks. And we still want learning centers. It's a central aspect of Maple Bear pedagogy, collaboration. And we can't do collaboration if we take away the environment that allows that. So learning centers, we keep them. And remember, these kids are 6 years old. They're not, 18, they're 6. They still need to have centers which provide variety and challenge and fun. Next slide, please. So learning centers, as I said, are key. Students work together on hands-on activities, and it allows the teacher to differentiate. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that later too. Differentiation means that the teacher can group children in a way that allows her to work with a small group that might need a little bit extra teaching, while a group who already has mastered an outcome can do some enrichment. There's so many things that you can do if you have centers that you can't do if you're teaching whole class, everybody doing the same thing. Next slide, please. So play is the serious work of children. And I found this photo of Maple Bear children, and they're clearly having a good time, but I will tell you that I guarantee that they learned something. And they're showing you they're learning in a dramatic and interesting way, as opposed to, doing a test or, filling in the blanks on a worksheet. And we should be happy that they're doing that. We don't want them to think that doing something like this is not really learning. We want them to know that learning involves a lot of different kinds of things. Next slide, please. So play. Let's talk about the brain just for a moment. Play is how children learn. It's actually how children learn all the way up to high school. It helps wiring, making connections within the brain. It expands intelligence, stimulates the imagination, and encourages all the kinds of things that Maple Bear promises we're going to deliver. If you see the little diagram here, at birth, there's not a lot of connections. But at 6 years old, look at all the connections. And the more we teach in the Maple Bear way, with fun and engagement, the more connections your kids' brains are going to have. Next slide, please. Let's just pause. I'd love to have a brain break. We don't have a lot of time, but maybe jot down or put into your memory what you want to keep in mind about the profile and the needs of the elementary learner as you embark on adding elementary years to your school. How are elementary children different from early years learners? And how are they similar is another good question, because they are similar. We still want to do that wonderful Maple Bear relationship. It doesn't all of a sudden become a police state when they get into elementary. All right, Bia, next slide, please. Another aspect of Maple Bear that you as school leaders really need to be the guardians of is the immersion milieu. And we are introducing more Portuguese into the children's day, but the reason parents choose, one of the reasons they choose Maple Bear is because they want their children to be bilingual. That's a priority, obviously. So in order for that to happen, the children have to be surrounded by English. Children learn a language by listening to it, by imitating it, and using it. They don't learn it just by having a teacher talk to them. They have to hear it, yes, but they also have to use it. And they have to use it as much as possible, not just when the teacher calls on them at circle time. We want them to be using English in the whole time that they're in their English block. So if they go to a center and they're working on some kind of problem-solving task with a group, and one group's doing that and another group is doing a game over here and another group is with the teacher, they all need to be speaking English. And again, this is part of the difficulty that elementary teachers have, is to try to encourage kids to use their English, not just when the teacher can hear them, but as much as possible, all the time. It's even fun to have a day when they use English in the cafeteria when they go for their snack. The more sort of fun ways that you can get children to use their English, the better they're going to speak. Nobody learns to speak a language by not speaking it. So creating and maintaining the milieu is your job as a school leader. It supports literacy, and it's what we're promising the parents. So we want to deliver on that. Next slide, Bia. So literacy in English and Portuguese is the skill of being able to read and write. And that's a very complex task, very. And your year one students are just beginning on that journey of being, literate in English and in Portuguese. So their days are going to be full of challenges in both languages. So we have to support the learning. We're expecting kids to write. We have to teach them to write. We're expecting kids to read. We have to teach them to read. We can't just think it happens by magic. There are some very specific things we need to do. So I've already mentioned the oral language, but there's more. Next slide, please. Okay, guided reading. And some of you may already have your senior kindergarten teachers beginning on this. It's absolutely essential that your teachers understand what guided reading is. And they can't hide and they can't say, yes, I'm teaching reading, but they're not doing guided reading. No. They have to do guided reading. That's the way it works. You see this teacher here has a lovely half moon table, and I would highly recommend that you have one of those for each of your elementary classrooms. It's perfect for the task of the teacher to be looking at their small group of children who are grouped by their reading level, and gives her a really great vantage point to see who's doing what and who needs help and who has moved to the next level. Running records And again, this is something that requires training. Teachers are not familiar with it. I wasn't. I had to learn it. And there are excellent training videos, and there are excellent written resources on this. And any Maple Bear trainer can help your teachers with this. But you need to ask. If your teachers are not doing it, you can pitch in and help them too. When you learn how to do running records, it's really nice if you can sometimes go in the classroom and say, I'll do running records for 5 children. Send them to me one at a time. It's really nice to do. And that's supportive, and it also models what you want them to do. All right, next slide. So writing. I already mentioned the scenario where a teacher writes a writing prompt on the whiteboard. You know, what's your favorite movie? And then says, go write in your journal to some year 1 or year 2 students. This is a recipe for disaster. First of all, they have trouble reading the prompt. Secondly, there's no scaffolding. There's nothing to help the child generate ideas. If I said to you, right now, I want you to write down something about Maple Bear immersion, and we hadn't talked about it, you'd be looking at a blank piece of paper saying, oh, where do I start? What do I say? And it's the same with kids. If you don't help them, especially beginning English speaking and writing kids, if you don't help them do the pre-writing things, the writing is not going to happen. And I've seen kids in early elementary classrooms spend 20 minutes copying the date onto their paper. And they waste the whole time that is supposed to be about writing in their journal, writing the date, because that's what they can do. So you have to help your teachers understand the importance of all those pre-writing activities that are in the Maple Bear program and on the internet. There's a lot of strategies that are provided. There's a couple of scaffolds that really help too that I want to mention. A word wall, and I've seen some pretty sad word walls, and I've seen some excellent ones. A word wall is supposed to have words that the children can use in their writing. And they have to know that they can walk over to the word wall and see how to spell that word and how to use it. Another really important thing that is mentioned in the Year 1 program, but I think not enough mentioned in the actual lesson plans, is teaching high frequency words. And these are also called power words or Dolch list, or, there's a lot of different names for it, but they're high frequency words. If children learn those high frequency words, they're going to read faster and better, because high frequency words compose 70 to 80% of any text in English. So if they can learn those words by sight, then it's really going to help. So teachers need to incorporate that into their literacy lessons. And Writer's Workshop, there's a document about that, and it's all about what I've been talking about, scaffolding and providing activities that will help children generate ideas, organize ideas, and then be proud of the product that they come up with after they edit. Next slide, please. There's 2 more parts to comprehensive literacy. I don't know where the oral went, but speaking and listening and viewing and representing. These are sometimes neglected, but Maple Bear has songs, poems, and chants in elementary for a reason. You know how song lyrics stick in your head? You can sing a song that you learned 20 years ago. It's in there. And that's one of the reasons that we use a lot of songs in Maple Bear. So it's not a time waster. It's not silly. It's a way of learning. And same with having kids draw and make illustrations and graphs. It's another way of expressing your learning that should not be minimized. And of course, it's literacy, but it can also be used in math class, science class. It can be integrated. Next slide, please. Our math and science programs, again, concepts, not content. We want them thinking about concepts and using manipulatives. If you haven't bought manipulatives yet, get on Amazon right now or get on the Maple Bear store right now. Every class needs to have lots of manipulatives for math. It's how we work, and the lesson plans depend on it. So your teachers are going to be saying, how do I do these lessons? I don't have the manipulatives. They need them, and the kids need them and enjoy them. Science, you need the equipment that's on the list as well, because we want our kids doing hands-on activities. We want them experimenting. And another pet peeve that I've communicated to a few teachers is I've walked into science classes and the teacher is doing the experiment. And then the kids don't get to do it. They just watch the teacher do science and then they have to write something. Well, that's just ass backwards. The kids should be doing the experiment, and that's how they learn. They don't learn by watching the teacher do it. So watch for that. When you go into your classrooms to make observations, make sure you help teachers if you see them doing something like this. Next slide, please. All right, Math Makes Sense is the textbook. And I've taken a quote here. Math Makes Sense is the foundation of our math program beginning in year 1. I heard a rumor that they may not be publishing paper textbooks for much longer. And I think that's a good thing for the environment. I hope they're going to provide ebooks, which are, I think, a great alternative, but I'm not sure what the situation is. What difficulties will year 1 students have with using the math textbook? Think about it, especially when they're in the first few months of school. I'll give you a hint. They can't read. So it's very difficult to just assign them. Turn to page 42 in your math textbook and do the questions. How can they when they can't read them? So you need to help teachers not become overly, reliant on textbooks. And if they are going to use them, they need to do it at a teacher table where they can help with the reading of the questions. And, you can use your guided reading table for guided math as well, and have the teacher work with students in small groups. And that's a great way to assess where they are too. You can see which child can't add. And then you can get the manipulatives out and make a group with all the kids who are having trouble with that and sit with them and work on it while other kids are doing other things. So same with science. Next slide, please, B. I already mentioned this. What you should see in a classroom when science is happening, you should see kids doing what these kids are doing on the slide. They're doing the science. And the wonderful thing is they're collaborating. Beautiful. Pearson Complete Science 1 package is the science resource. And I think there's teacher support resources there included in that. So it's a good thing. All right, next slide. I'm going to try to not talk too much about this, but it's really important. Your teachers are going to be moving, the early years you used a continuum. Now there's a continuum for year 1 to year 7 ELA. And we want to follow a similar procedure in noting where students are, which things on that continuum can they do. And in order to do that, you have to have the teachers aware of the continuum, and they have to be trained on whatever procedures your school has put in place for recording progress. It's not optional. It's the way we assess the kids' growth. And it really helps teachers once they get used to it. They have to recognize when they're filling in the continuum that kids do learn in different ways and in different rates and in a different order. But the teacher's job is to figure out who needs what and collect items that show the learning. Next slide, please. Okay, some Maple Bear best practices that challenge traditional beliefs. Formative and diagnostic assessment versus repeated summative evaluations. So in Maple Bear, we want lots of formative assessment, meaning we want teachers to use assessment not to grade children or to sort them into the ones who get it and the ones who don't, but we want them to use it to guide their teaching. And we don't want them doing a whole bunch of tests or giving them major projects without having done any of the pre-project work. We want them to use rubrics and checklists as scaffolds. And Maple Bear has lots of examples of those in the program. The learning target should never be a secret. So if you give kids the rubric that you're going to be using to mark their project or to evaluate, that's not cheating. They should know what it is you're looking for. So if you're going to give them marks for having a good title, a good introduction, 3 paragraphs, whatever, they need to know that. It shouldn't come as a surprise after they've handed in their work. We also want elementary students to self-assess and include that as part of the program. Next slide, please. So here's a nice little graphic. The purpose of assessment is to increase quality, and the purpose of evaluation is to judge quality. So you have to know when to do each one. I'm not saying we never evaluate, but we evaluate after we've assessed lots of times to help children get it. We want them all to be able to demonstrate the learning. Some are going to excel. Some are going to do more than what we ask them to do. But we want to make sure everybody gets there. Next slide, please. So this slide you can look at later, but we do assessment for learning. We get information about where kids are, and we help them by giving them feedback and saying, you know what, I think you could do a better title, or your opening sentence is kind of boring. Let's make it more interesting. Assessment as learning. So when kids monitor their own progress, they use self-assessment. They have a checklist and they say, oh, I've done this. Oh, I forgot that. Better get that in. And assessment of learning is the part where we take a snapshot. At this point, this is what the child can do. Next slide, please. So here's a slide that usually causes consternation. I've used this many times in training in schools, and sometimes I've had teachers, almost cry. I don't want to make anybody cry. And if they understand this ahead of time, there should be no tears. When you are doing evaluation, when it comes close to report card time and you need to develop a grade for elementary kids, which you do, here's what should not count. And you, as school leaders, have to look at how teachers are coming up with their grades. You can't just say, oh, that kid got a B and that's fine. You need to ask the teacher, show me how you came up with B. How did that kid get a D? So what should not count are formative assessments, pre-tests, practice assignments, little quizzes that you give them to see if they actually understood the math lesson. It's only your information. It's not to grade the kids. You haven't finished teaching them yet. Homework completion marks. A dramatic pause here. We don't give homework completion marks. Oh, I've got that twice. This is really important. We don't give homework assignment marks, and we don't give homework completion marks. So when we send home a little task for the children to do, and we really shouldn't be sending them anything too much in early elementary, we don't grade those ever, because we don't know who's doing them. And I'm sure with your virtual classrooms, you've probably heard this message. The kids are at home with their parents overseeing their work and maybe helping them. It doesn't really give you an accurate idea of what the kid can do. You don't know how much the parent has helped. And we don't give completion marks because it's not fair. It's not up to the child at home if their parent decides that they're going to take them to karate and then take them out for dinner and then put them to bed. It's not fair to give completion marks in elementary, and they shouldn't really be doing homework other than reading anyway. What should count? Evaluations done after teaching and practice, not just written things. You can evaluate a skit. You can evaluate a PowerPoint. If a child does something a second time, if they do a paragraph and you give them the feedback and say, you know what, you must have had a bad day. That's not your best work. Why don't we try that again? You count the new mark. You don't count the old mark, because the kid now can do it. You're telling the parent what the kid can do. He can write a paragraph. He showed it, not the first time, but the second time. Learning behaviors and social skills are also fair game, but they're separate. So you don't include learning behaviors in the academic area of the report card, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. Anything that you give them as a project, even if they work in teams, that's valid as part of their grade. They're showing their learning. All right, Bea, next slide, please. I mentioned differentiation here because that's one of the reasons that we do assessment and evaluation. And I mentioned it briefly in the guided reading slide. You need to know which kids need what. And differentiation can be done if you use centers. So like I said, you can have a math group that needs enrichment over here, and you can have a math group that needs you to reteach because they didn't get it the first time. Or you can have a reading group that is struggling with only 3 kids in it, and you have other groups with 5 or 6 kids doing more complicated reading activities or word work. And we want to see that. When you go into a classroom, you should rarely see everybody doing the same thing at the same time. If you see kids sitting at tables, but they're all doing a worksheet by themselves, that's not Maple Bear. That's not the way it should be done. If there is a worksheet at the table and they're all collaborating on getting it done, okay. But if you've got 20 kids all doing a worksheet, you're going to have some kids that finish in 30 seconds because they already know it. And you're going to have some kids that take half an hour to put the date on it because they don't know it and they don't want to show that they don't know it. So that's why you need to have your staff understand the importance of centers and differentiation. And I know there's a lot more to it, but we're not going to belabor it. It's just something that I want you to look for when you enter classrooms in elementary. We want you to see lots of action and a variety of things going on. with that good noise showing you that kids are learning. Next slide, please. One of my favorite concepts to talk to teachers about in elementary is the gradual release of responsibility. And it's one of the joys of teaching elementary. They're not grown-ups, but they're not babies, and they appreciate autonomy. So let's help them take autonomy in the right direction with responsibility and respect for the community of learners. So they can't do it unless we teach it to them, and unless we let them try it and reteach if they don't quite get it. So you have to trust kids to work independently sometimes in a table group without a teacher there or without a TA there. They have to learn how to do that and accept responsibility and know that they don't get up from the table and interrupt your guided reading teacher. Miss, he won't share the manipulatives with me. We have to teach kids that you work it out at your table. You ask a friend, you put your hand up if you have to, but you don't, abdicate responsibility. So we have to teach that. Students have to become responsible for their learning. Next slide, please. And you can look at this at your leisure, but it helps you understand how we move from the teacher doing things to the teacher doing something and having the students help them, and then the student doing it and the teacher helping the student, reversing it, and then the student taking the independence to do it on their own. But you have to, help the children move through those phases. Don't just throw it at them. Like, what's your favorite movie? Go write about it. You need to do the demonstration and the support before they can do that independent task. Next slide, please. Okay, classroom management. Again, it's something that sometimes becomes an issue in elementary because teachers have that wrong mindset where they think they're the boss and they have to tell kids what to do at all times. But classroom management has to be much better than that in a Maple Bear school. So the teacher's actions in classrooms have twice the impact on student achievement as do school policies regarding curriculum, assessment, blah, blah, blah. It is one of the teacher's most important jobs because children can't learn in a chaotic, poorly organized classroom. Children can't learn in a chaotic classroom. So it's really important. If you go into a classroom and there's chaos, you need to address it. Not now, but right now. You need to help that teacher. And there's a lot of different ways you can help, but you have to help them understand, and this is an unpopular statement, but a true statement, if the classroom is a mess, it's the teacher's fault. Everything that happens in the classroom comes down to the teacher. You can't blame the children and say they're bad kids. They're not bad kids. The teacher hasn't handled it right. And they're not going to want to hear that, and nobody wants to hear that. But it's one of the lessons that I had to learn as a teacher. One of our favorite pastimes as teachers in my schools used to be sitting in the staff room and complaining. But really, that's silly because what you do has developed the environment in the classroom and how you react to what the kids do. So teachers who have high quality relationships with their students had 31% fewer discipline problems, rule violations, and related problems. So if a child or a group of children think the teacher doesn't like them, and they know, unless the teacher is a great actor, kids know if the teacher's annoyed with them all the time. They know if the teacher just rolls her eyes and, oh, not you again. And it's not going to turn out well, ever. So we need to help the teachers understand that classroom management relies on good relationships. Next slide, please. We're almost there. Hang in there, people. So here are the teachers that you want to hire. Warm, friendly, and firm. They are the people who create a community of learners, a learning environment where all students belong and where students feel safe and accepted. And I have to say, my last point here, happy children, happy teacher, and a community of learners is what you're looking for. An unhappy teacher who comes to school every day dreading what's going to happen in the classroom is not going to do a good job. And the kids are going to, they sense that. And their behavior is going to show it. So we want classroom agreements where the children participate in making the rules for the class. A few rules, not a page of rules, maybe 5 max. Established routines are expected and respected. And if they're not respected, they're retaught until they are installed. Optimum use of time for learning. So if the teacher has that community and only has to tell the kids once that we're switching now, not 5 times, and call out 10 kids' names, there's more learning time. We're not wasting time on being a cop. We want positive discipline instead of punishments or rewards. We don't do punishments in Maple Bear. We don't take away recess. We don't make kids, put their heads down for a half hour. And we don't give them rewards like stickers. And I could talk for an hour about that, but I won't. Just hear this, that punishments and rewards do not work. We want kids to have intrinsic motivation to do the right thing because they love their class and they want to be a good citizen and they enjoy having activities conducted without chaos. They want that, but they need the teacher to make sure that happens. Next slide. Okay, what we expect in a Maple Bear classroom. Joy, enthusiastic effort. Look at these little girls. That's what it should look like. And students accepting more and more responsibility. We need to have the space for them, and we'll talk about that in the next session. We need clear expectations. We need lots of resources. And we need to have the kids work up in the classroom and in the halls so they can see what their peers are doing and feel pride in what they've done. And a lot of times kids learn by looking what other kids have done. They get ideas, and that's a good thing. It's not copying, it's being inspired. So we want to have lots of student work up on display. Next. And this is the last slide you'll be happy to hear for today. I found a poem on a website, and I made it Maple Bear for us. So if children are taught with criticism, they learn to be harsh. If children are taught with nastiness, they learn to battle or fight. If children are taught with anger, they learn to fear. If children are taught with ridicule, they learn to be wary. But if children are taught with encouragement, they learn to be confident. If children are taught with acceptance, they learn to be open-minded. If children are taught with fairness, they learn to be reasonable. If children are taught with humanity, they learn to respect. So that's what Maple Bear is all about. And that's what we want you to internalize and help your teachers internalize so they can help the children learn and help parents appreciate what you do. And I I'm going to stop there. I've got time for questions if you have any, but some of them I may be addressing tomorrow. Not to discourage you from asking, but if you do have a question or you want clarification on something, you can definitely put it in the chat, or you can wait till tomorrow, and I will try to be briefer tomorrow so I leave more time for questions and answers at the end. And if you want to write your questions in Portuguese, that's fine. I know that Bianca will help me with those questions. I think I might have talked you into submission. Everybody's tired. And you know what? This is exactly what happens to students in the classroom if the teacher talks too much. So again, I apologize.
Hi, RP. I think we don't have, yes, we have actually one question here for you. So can you say a few more words about student-centeredness?
I could talk about it forever. It's the central pillar of Maple Bear, and it's the thing that teachers sometimes have trouble with. A student-centered classroom means that it's not all about the teacher. Everything doesn't go through the teacher. The teacher is like the guide on the side, which doesn't minimize their impact. Teachers are still really important in a student-centered classroom. They have to know what to say and how to say it and how to let go and let the children experiment. A student-centered classroom is a classroom where the focus is on learning through doing. And I often like to use the example of even adult learning. When my daughter loved horses, and she decided she wanted to take horseback riding. And so I was at the barn all the time, and I saw what fun it was. And my sisters and I decided we were going to learn to ride a horse. We didn't read a book about it. We went to the barn, and the teacher taught us everything by having us do it. She didn't have us read an article about how to groom a horse. She had us do it. She had us get on the horse the correct way. She didn't say, you know, first you put your right foot in or put your left foot in. She showed us, and then we did it. And there was a lot more learning happening because we had to try it as opposed to just blah, 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 and then write a test on the parts of a horse or how to clean a saddle. When you have to actually clean the saddle, you learn how to clean the saddle. And I mean, it's the same with any sport. You don't just talk about karate. You do it. Somebody demonstrates it, and then you try it. Kids will try things 100 times if they are interested in it. For example, I don't know if you have kids who are skateboarders, but I marvel at kids who are skateboarders. They will try a trick 1,000,000 times before they can actually get it. But if we tried to ask them to do a math question 100 times, they wouldn't have the same feeling about it. We have to understand that learning is an activity. It's not a passive thing. And the hard part for teachers is to minimize their talking and to understand that kids need to try things. And then they can talk a little bit more and get kids to try again, then talk a bit more. I don't know if that answers the question, but there's many resources on student-centered learning, and the Maple Bear Handbook and resources in the elementary area can be very helpful there with some strategies that go along with student-centered learning.
Perfect. Thank you, RP. We have more questions. So how the SLM, the student learning materials, takes part in the Maple Bear pedagogy?
Right. Well, that's a challenge for sure. And I think one of the reasons that it's a challenge is because they're so comprehensive. They're so big. And teachers have to figure out a way to incorporate them into the lessons and that's sometimes a challenge because, again, every child is going to have the same SLMs, but that doesn't mean they have to do them the same way or do all the same ones. So, for example, the teacher can select certain SLMs for a group of children and a different couple of pages for somebody for a different group. And I understand that that's difficult especially with inexperienced teachers and who feel that they have to somehow wedge those into every day. And if they don't, they feel like the parents are going to be, annoyed at them. But again, we have to help parents understand that SLMs are learning materials, and we have so many learning materials in Maple Bear. We can't do them all. And we have to be selective as to what is required for different kids. And I know that may be an unsatisfactory answer, but I'm just saying, don't feel that you have to instruct your staff to use every single page of every single, SLM. They have to be selective. And you know what? There's some really nice ideas about how to use them that schools have come up with. For example, some schools have sort of a catch-up period on Fridays, and kids who are struggling with a concept could be given some of the SLMs that relate to that concept and work with the teacher while other kids are doing a different activity, and they can use that to help them get caught up. And other kids who've maybe missed some days can be doing some tasks that were done when they were away at another table. So being kind of creative in how you use your schedule can help you use the SLMs in a sensible way.
Thank you, RP. One more question. Do you have any suggestions to teachers and coordinators on how to deal with children who has a bad behavior? For example, never sits to do the activity and so on. What's the best way to deal with it?
Oh, I wish I had a magic wand. I would send it over there. You know what? There's no one answer to that, but the answer is that you have to develop a relationship with the kid. And the hardest part is that the kids who most need your affection and your support sometimes are the ones who challenge you the most. And some of them may have a problem like ADHD they need special supports. And talking to kids about those things is really important. So if there's a student who's constantly, getting up and wandering around when you're trying to, have a lesson or an activity, you need to have sort of one-on-one time with that child and talk to them in a open way and say, what you're doing is getting in the way of your learning, and it's also getting in the way of other people's learnings. What can I do to help you? And what can we do that will help you focus better? And a lot of times, if they do have something like ADHD, there are some really good strategies in the special needs training that will help with that. I've had students who really needed to get up and move around. They couldn't help it. And so the teacher has to figure out a way to make it part of an acceptable routine for that child. For example, you can say, I'm going to put a timer on your desk, and when the timer is up, you can please go to the office and have a timeout with the coordinator for 5 minutes and time it and come back. If you try to do some things that are kind of special and nice for those kids rather than punitive, like don't send them, you're going to the coordinator because you just are a pain. That's not what I mean. I think you need to have regular breaks more than other kids. So let's figure out a way to do it. And even if they're supposed to be sitting at their center with other students and they are having a hard time, if you know that they're going to have a hard time, they can have a little card on their desk, a special card just for them, or every kid could have it, I guess. They turn it to the red side if they're struggling, and you go over there, or your TA goes over there, and you do something constructive with that child. You say, what do you need? Do you need some help? Do you need to get a drink of water? Do you need to do 3 laps around the table and then sit down again? I mean, there's no one good answer, is what I guess I'm babbling about here. It's really important, though, that you show the kid that you care, not that you're angry, and try to figure out, with the help maybe of your psychologist, if you have a school psychologist, or with the parent, talk to the parent. What do you do with your child when they're unable to settle, when they can't focus? Sometimes a fidget, but you know, some kids will take the fidget and misuse it. But again, if you offer it as a way to help them, or a special cushion for their seat, there's a lot of different strategies that can be used, but I can't go through a million of them right now. But if you need help, there's always Maple Bear special needs training, and there's lots of ideas in there that can be useful. But the relationship is key. A lot of times kids are misbehaving because well, there's a lot of different reasons, but one of the reasons is because they're struggling with the work. So they need help, but they don't want to say, I need help. Or they're struggling with peers. They feel like the kids at their table don't like them or don't want them. Or they feel that the teacher doesn't appreciate them. And any of those things interferes with behavior.
Perfect. And we have another question, is still regarding the same content. Like, if we do something special when they are misbehaving, when they keep misbehaving in order to have a special moment, I believe that is so hard to find the balance.
It is hard. But again, you can have a little tally sheet, for example. You can say, okay, now that you're used to doing this special thing, we're going to try to make sure that we don't use it too much so that you're missing a whole bunch of learning. So let's keep a little tally on your desk, and not on the whiteboard where everybody can see it, but maybe they have, you know, only 4 opportunities during the English block or whatever it is. And you just tell them, you know, you're only going to have 4. So make sure that when you tell me that you need this special thing, that you really need it. Again, that's not going to be a perfect answer for every child, but most kids will respond if they know that you're trying to help them.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Arpi. Thank you, everyone who participated today on the workshop. I sent all the links that you need here on the chat. We have the Google Drive folder link to find the files to help you with this transition. You also have Google Forms where you have to confirm your attendance in order for us to generate your certificate. And also this webinar is being recorded. So right now I'm gonna download this recording and upload on the YouTube playlist that I shared with everyone here, so you can rewatch later if you have any questions. So thank you, Arpi. Thank you, everyone. And we see you see you tomorrow again 1 p.m. Brazil time. So thank you, everyone, for participating.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. You were awesome. Thanks for sticking with it.